Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Antry. I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. I had hoped in the back of my mind that audio quality at least might get a little bit better, but it's probably going to be worse this week than last week. So updates.
I'm looking forward to the cat.
Yeah, updates from my end. I am staying at my sister's place this week, house sitting and cat sitting while they are away on a last of summer vacation. Happy Labor Day, by the way, everybody. So yeah, the setup is even more makeshift on my end, still on my gaming headset to record. But then, yes, my sister has cats, one of whom is very lovey-dovey, so he might be making his way in here at some point to say hello. It's worse if I keep the door shut. Believe me, that is much worse than just letting him come in here and cuddle for a little bit. And then they're also working on the roofs on all of the complex in here, so there might be banging and noises, and there really isn't much I can do to mitigate that right now. So I'm gonna just say something is better than nothing when it comes to recording, and hopefully that'll be acceptable, because this is what you got, so you kind of don't have much choice. How's things over on Tom's end?
So I have been complaining about my computer because the trackpad's not really working properly, or whatever. It's stupid. And I've been extremely busy along with that. And then last night I was setting my alarm so I could wake up early this morning to go cycling. And I was like, oh, my phone seems to be coming out of its case. I must have dropped it or nicked or something happened.
Sure.
So I turned the light on to figure out what was going on. My phone's expanding.
Oh, the battery's bursting. Okay.
Yeah. So
that happens sometimes.
Fun.
Yeah.
That's fun.
That can be repaired.
I'm a year out of warranty, so Google's like, we're gonna wave at you, but only with one finger. So that's not great. So I have to try to deal with that today, because if I want to get a new Pixel, which I would, it's going to be like, I think the Pixel 6a is like $450 or something like that.
Something like that. And I don't really follow.
The 6 and the 6 Pro are like a lot more expensive.
Yeah, they're much more.
I don't know that I can afford any of that. So whatevs.
And that was an original manufacturer battery, right? You never had it replaced, third party or anything?
Yeah, It's just a Pixel 5. I mean, it's only one generation old.
Yeah, it's a little unusual because it's very common for the third-party replacement batteries to end up expanding and bursting, but usually the first-party ones are pretty good, so that's not great.
No, not happy about that, so I got to deal with that today. But yeah, other than that, it's just been family stuff.
Okay.
I've just been completely slammed over here with family and family related things. So
right, I'm sure on my end people might be wondering about any progress with my apartment. I have very little to report. Well, I mean, they did at least remove all the debris. Like, everything was, whoa, that was a big thump upstairs. Everything was removed out of my apartment at least, so there was that little bit of progress. But what's going on is they kind of get to do everything that the Strata is paying for first, which, given that it was all the same company, will include replacing the part of my bathroom that they damaged. So like all that's got to get done first, and then they're working on 4 suites together, because it was the suite above me that leaked, so it's me and everyone below me. So like all of that has to get done before I get to the part that my insurance covers of actually putting everything back together. So yeah, this is going to be a very protracted thing. So. Yeah, I know. I have nothing to report, essentially, except that at least the debris is gone now.
Yeah, you guys should. Yeah.
And it was a long weekend, so 3 days of nothing going on there.
Right.
Good times.
All right. I don't remember. Do we talk about the movies first, or we go to the intro first?
Let's say who we are and what the heck this is going on, because this sounds like two guys just talking about their weeks.
Yeah, let's just do that. Let's just have that for this week's podcast. Let's just you and I
that's
shoot
kind of where
shoot
we are
stuff.
mentally. That's about where we are, folks.
It's been a very weird morning. Like, I woke up like not feeling great, not like sick, but just sort of like in a crappy mood, and it just gotten worse. So I'm trying to caffeinate my way out of it, and now I'm starting to see double. So that's not great.
Good stuff.
Oh yeah, I also kind of finally admitted that I need reading glasses this week, and that's a blow to my ego as well. So there's just emotionally a lot going on, Rob.
I mean, it's creeping up on me, and I'm 9 years younger than you, so it's going to come for us all, those eye issues.
I've been like, I just need more light. I'm having my low light vision's not so great.
Hey,
it's
you're
not
going to want
low light vision.
You're going to want the 2000 nit TV. That's what's going on with you.
Yeah, no, really. I guess I'm farsighted, I guess, now, because I can see and read perfectly fine.
Distance is fine. Sure, yeah.
Yeah, it's just the stuff that's real small and real close that I have a problem with. So.
Yeah,
all right, it's AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You can go to avrant.com, find our older episodes and all our show notes, along with Flickr albums, so that you can follow along with the images that we're showing. We also have a YouTube channel, so facebook.com/AVRant podcast, youtube.com/AVRant. The YouTube, you can listen along, and then if you glance up when we start talking about something that's an image, it should be on the screen. If not, it'll just be our heads, usually.
I mean, usually it'll be our heads and images. Right now, with the very janky makeshift setup, you're just going to have static image until there's an image, a picture to show of some kind.
Yeah. You can contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His Twitter's @FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter's @avrant_Tom. I'm also getting a haircut today. I'm excited about that. I guess that's a bright point.
That's where we are in our lives.
That's where we are.
Haircut is the high spot.
Haircut is where it's just something really to keep you going throughout the day, is knowing that
that's right.
Somebody's going to look at your head and go, well, that's really the best I could do. And we can't fix your face. So this is it. This is as good as it gets. All right, Rob, what did you watch? That was pretty much everything, right?
I think people can get in touch with us. Question@avrant.com. That's really all you really need to know.
Right.
And
we'll thank listeners of the week in a second here, guys.
We will.
If you worry about that, don't worry. First, Rob's got to talk about the crap you watched.
Again, I haven't been watching a ton. I don't have a home theater right now, but I did go ahead and I watched The Purge, the original one from 2013, the thing that started it all.
I've heard that those movies have gotten better, and I love horror movies, and I love action violence movies, so this should be right up my alley. It just has never shown up on any of the streaming services that I have access to.
There's a TV series version of it now too, and there was 5 or 6 movies.
4 or 5 episodes of that, and I gave up. I was like, there's not enough purging going on in this Purge TV show.
Yes. Well, I went back and watched the original Purge. I had never watched it before, and I watched it mainly because it was a tight 90. So, yeah, I mean, it's the Purge. Most people have probably seen it. Okay movie. They certainly focus on, when all crime is legal, they really only focus on murder. That's the only crime that they focus on. All the other crimes, because there are more crimes than just murder, don't really seem to get any focus. So, there's that.
Yeah, it really seems like embezzlement would be the thing to do. If all crimes are legal,
yes.
it feels like embezzlement and insider trading would be the go-to.
No kidding.
Murder seems like really short-sighted.
Insurance fraud. The lotto scams, there's a lot of stuff. Not to mention other violent crimes that aren't murder that are perhaps worse in the outcomes. So yeah, in any case, the movie kept to what it was. So that was The Purge. That was fine. It got through that just fine in its tight 90-minute runtime. And then, just getting on to the 3rd season of Star Trek Lower Decks. That is the animated comedy series version of it. Enjoying that very, very much. So that's a nice little bright spot, a nice little distraction is to have that back. So glad that is back and having a good laugh. How about Tom?
I really watched very little this weekend. I feel like I watched a movie with my wife and son, but I don't think I did. It's just all the kids were gone at staggered times, and my college son came back for a day. Spent the night and then left. So it was just sort of a rotating in and out of kids all weekend. So I did watch a couple of episodes of The Dragon Prince with my youngest son, who I guess had heard about it or whatever from somebody. Seems really good. I've
heard very good things about it. What service is that one on?
I think for us it's Netflix. I think.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But it's animation is nice. The story seems, pretty well developed and interesting. I did try to start Lord of the Rings. I was still watching She-Hulk, of course, loving it still. Mm-hmm. We got to the end of this episode, and my wife and son looked at me when it's over already. I'm like, do you think I write these things? I'm like, I don't know. I guess there's going to be an after credits thing because there always is in this thing. So it's still liking that. Tried to watch Lord of the Rings last night.
Now this is the new series, The Rings of Power.
Yeah, The Rings of Power. So got like 2.5 seconds into it before my wife started yawning and sighing.
No, that's on what? That's on Amazon.
Amazon Prime.
That's on Amazon Prime. Okay.
Yeah, and it's obviously it's got like a huge budget or whatever, and everybody's talking about how whatever. We got to the opening credits. Not the credits, but like the title card. We got to that. So there's a lot before it that was kind of like the backstory and stuff, and then, I was following it and trying to like tell my wife, and she's just not.
Wait, the title card is as far as you got?
That was as far as we got.
Okay, so it was about maybe
10 minutes into the hour-long episode is how far we got before she was like, "Okay, we're gonna have to pause it for now." I'm like,
"Wow,
pause it for now?" I mean,
that's literally the prelude.
It is. Each episode is so far. There's only 2, and both of them are over an hour. So this is not going to be something she's going to watch. I mean, I don't even know why she's bothering. But and we are still working our way through Grace and Frankie, which is on Netflix with Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin, and that's great. I mean, it's funny. It's interesting. I mean, it's older, but it's I don't feel like it is poorly written. I also don't feel like it's not it's in any way I don't know, sugarcoating things, I guess. I mean, these people don't have financial problems, but they're all retired. So, I guess the guys aren't. They're still working as lawyers, but for the most part, people are retired and they're not. Money doesn't really factor into what they do. But
okay, gotcha.
It is other than that, which is of course a sitcom kind of staple, like. Nobody in Friends could ever have lived in New York.
And based on the amount they actually worked. In the first episode, those apartments were rent controlled. They were pretending to be Monica's elderly aunt or something like that. I forget. I think it was
whatever.
It was in the first episode.
I have seen that episode and I don't remember that. I've seen it multiple times. So, anyways, but yeah, it ends up feeling very teenagery. But if you've ever hung out with old people who hang out with each other, that's pretty true to life. Everybody gets real petty real fast.
Nobody ever grows up.
No. They just get weirder about the things they get angry about. All right, let's talk about our listeners of the week. So the listeners of the week are people who have supported the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link. And that'll take you to a PayPal donation. So we want to thank Alan and Raph for doing that this week. Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Raph.
Yeah, that was really nice. Alan and Raph, thank you very much for the PayPal donations. You can find that at avrant.com. Thank you for the financial support.
We got some other types of donations as well here. We got Aras, who sent Rob a donation via PayPal to help with his apartment restoration.
Yeah, thank you, Aras. That was sent directly to me, so that was very nice of you. Appreciate it, Aras. Thank you.
Good. And Eddie sent Rob a Canadian movie code for The Little Prince.
That's right. Yeah, thank you very much, Eddie. I that was actually like last week, but I'm pretty sure I forgot to put that in because that came via Twitter, and I was like only looking through emails, so wanted to make sure I get that mention in there. We also have our Patreon donations. We skip over that somehow.
Oh, we do.
I think we did. Yeah.
Yeah. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast. It's a service where you can every month they'll take some money from you and give most of it to us. So we have 138 patrons right now, including Rob M. So thank you to all of our patrons.
Yes, that's right. Thank you very much to our 138 patrons. Dropped down from 139, but hey, we're into a new month. That always happens. Somebody forgets to update their credit card information. So big thank you to our 138 patrons. And Rob M., thank you for being one of them.
If you can't support us financially, we understand. Just do something else and let us know what it is. Jason sent some photos to me. Some other people did too, I think, with permissions to use them on AV Gadgets, where I am the editor-in-chief. So thank you, editor-in-chief. I think that works too. So thank you, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Some nice photos that we'll be showing on the episode here on AVRant as well coming up. So good things to look at. Those are the ones I'm pretty sure Tom will end up using at some point on avgadgets.com. Thanks, Jason.
Both the dogs behind me on the couch. I was trying to figure out a way to set up this microphone so I can sit on my couch, but it just doesn't work. It just doesn't.
I mean, nobody's seeing it on YouTube yet.
I know, but that's why I was trying to figure it out this morning because I could play around with it. Anyways, we also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through this ongoing,
such as it is,
whatever's happening with the pandemic these days. I don't know. Maybe we're on to pandemic 2.0. The pox of the monkey or whatever it is. We got Dazz, who kindly reached out to Rob in the midst of Dazz and Drea going through some rough times of their own. Okay, I don't know what that means. Rob M, who says he, for one, enjoys our movie and TV reviews and preamble that we've been doing for the past little while. He usually ends up bringing a few of our episodes in a row, so it's nice change of pace to space out the questions a little bit. We got a thank you from Aras, from Gurinder, who bought the physical print version of Bob Moore No Hero a few months ago and finally got around to reading it last week. It's not that long, so that's good. Sounds like he loved it based on that review. Jason and Alan. So let's go through those again. Dazz, Rob, Aras, Gurinder, Jason, Alan. Thank you for thanking us.
Yes, indeed. Dazz, Rob M, Aras, Gurinder, Jason, and Alan. Thank you all very much for sending in those notes of gratitude to us. The notes of encouragement are definitely appreciated. I'm not going to say what Dazz said was going on behind the scenes unless he specifically says to say it on the podcast. So just know, thinking of you. Hope everything's going on all right over there for you and your wife. So yeah. There we go. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
I assume they're being attacked by ninjas.
That could be it. Good guess, Tom.
I pretty much always assume that because it is the most interesting of all the things that could actually be happening to them. Yeah, fending off a wave after wave of ninjas is what's happening. In the news, the forums were ablaze this week with a supposed leak of the forthcoming Denon Marantz receiver and separates models for 2022-23. An official announcement is expected at CES, so there's less than a month to wait to find out how much of this rumored information is true. Given that this information is unsubstantiated at this point and the original posts have now been removed, it would definitely be wise to take all of it with a huge grain of salt. But as an interesting bit of speculation and preview, we can run through what was posted and offer our thoughts. I think that there's a lot of people online who want to get famous for a second, and they'll do anything to do it.
I mean, I don't know. Scuttlebutt seems to be that this is pretty much right, given that there actually are like a few places in other countries that have already received actual units of some of the models to sell. So it seems like most of this is probably correct, which is why I'm willing to say it on the podcast. We'll confirm or refute as the official announcement comes up at the beginning of October there. But yeah, this seems like fairly spot on information, so we can have some fun going through it.
Okay, so Marantz appears to be going with a new naming convention for their models, and Massimo, the new owners of Sound United, appeared to be positioning Marantz as an even more premium brand versus Denon, which I think is kind of smart, to be honest with you, if the leaked prices are to be believed. Yeah, because having Marantz and Denon basically being clones of each other, except for pre-outs and a couple of little things.
Yeah, like 7.1 analog inputs, which was about the only differentiator.
Yeah, it never seemed like that was a way of keeping both of those brands around. So somebody was going to have to go. So that seems like I would believe that. So the rumors have Marantz's lineup starting with the slimline Cinema 70S, supposedly priced at $1,200, which would be a $100 increase over the current slimline NR 1711. It's supposed to offer 3 HDMI 2.1 ports, stick with regular Odyssey multi-Q, but expand to a full set of 7.2 pre-outs.
I mean, none of that is like super suspect to me. That all seems like things that could be very much true, particularly the 3 HDMI 2.1 ports, since they do already have that external 3-in, 1-out HDMI 2.1 switch. So basically building that inside makes all the sense in the world. We would expect that. No word yet on if those are 40 gigabits per second, like the current external switch is, or 48 gigabits per second, the maximum bandwidth allowed under the HDMI 2.1 specification, but doesn't really matter. All of your consoles use a maximum of 40 gigabits per second anyway, so yep, that makes sense. $100 price increase kind of makes sense with inflation. So expanding to a full set of 7.2 preouts would be kind of nice, because so far the slimlines have had preouts for just the front left and right channels, and then the subwoofers. Going to a full 7.2 preout set would be kind of a nice thing.
Yeah. Next would be the Marantz Cinema 60 at a supposed price of $1,700 to replace the $1,500 SR 5015. The rumored sister model in the Denon lineup, the X2800H, with a rumored price of $1,000, which seems a bit unlikely given that the 2700H is currently priced at $1,100, but we'll see. So,
I mean, they might be actually trying to move Denon lower in price and Marantz up. It's not impossible. So, but that's the rumor at this point.
Those were remaining 7.2 channel models with Odyssey Multi-QXT, but they'd have 3 HDMI 2.1 inputs, and the Marantz Cinema 60 would have a full set of 7.2 preouts, and the Denon X2800H would not. Does not sound like these are all that much different, except for a ridiculous price increase.
Yeah, so far,
delta.
Yeah, so far everything sounds very, very reasonable. We would definitely anticipate having the more than one HDMI 2.1 input. And as far as the slim line, and now this sort of entry into the X series in Denon, and the what used to be the SR regular series replacing the 5015, all sounds very reasonable.
Can you really have more than 3 HDMI 2.1 sources? So if you had a PS5, an Xbox Series X or whatever, and then a PC, that's it, right? That's like the 3 things you can have. Like, you wouldn't have 4.
That's, at the moment, that would be it.
So, I know it's like, why is there only 3? I'm like, I don't know why you would need 4 unless you were like a superpower gamer and you needed 2 PCs?
Yeah, multiple PCs,
I mean, that just seems like a lot of PCs. You know what I mean?
3 should do for most people.
I think 3 should do.
One
for just
was not
literally
enough.
Everybody, but yeah. One was enough for most people, because they buy one console and that's the one they got, and none of them have high-end gaming PCs that they hook up to a receiver. Which, I mean, there is high-end gaming PCs, but they generally don't hook up to a receiver. But okay. Then things get a lot more interesting with the Marantz Cinema 50, which is a number below 60.
Yeah, so they're doing the thing where the lower numerical number is higher in the lineup. That's the supposed change that's going on with the Marantz naming scheme.
I wanted them to come up with like when I first read Massimo, I was like, maybe that's like their avantage, line. You know what I mean? That's what they should have done. They should have come up with a name for it. The Denon used to have a name, right? Didn't the Denons, when the Avantage was, and then Denons were something else, I thought. Anyways. Cinema 50, supposedly priced at $2,500 with the Denon sister model, the 3800H. These are both $1,500? No, wait. The Denon is $1,500, the other one's $2,500.
I mean, that's the rumor. Again, that would actually be the 3800 being $100 less than the current 3700, but again, maybe that's what they're aiming for. Try and make the Denons even more affordable. And then the Marantz, like, this is the Cinema 50. This would be replacing the SR 6015. Gets confusing with the numbers going down now, but that seems to be what they're doing. But I mean, that's way more expensive. I mean, $1,000 more expensive than the Denon sister model, and considerably more expensive than the SR 6015 that it'd be replacing. So
I'm sure they're going to have some sort of capacitor and or wire-based reasoning for why it is so much more expensive. Our DACs are like
there is supposed to be an update to those HDAM Marantz DACs, or preamplifier circuitry, or whatever it is. It's supposed to be an update to that.
I'm going to need more coffee. These would have 9 amplifiers built in, but offer 11.4 preouts. Yes, 4 subwoofer outputs.
Yeah,
because they've gotten 2 subwoofer outputs so far. What's adding 2 more? They come with Odyssey Multi-QXT32, but the big new rumor is that you'll have the option to pay extra to add Direct Live as well as Direct Live bass management, which would take advantage of those 4 outputs, subwoofer outputs. Supposed to have 6 or 7 HDMI 2.1 ports, all of them supporting 4K 120, 8K 60, and the dedicated preamp and mode that completely shuts off all internal amplifiers, or I like to call it one of the most useless features in all of AV receivers. I don't believe this direct thing at all. I don't believe it.
I mean, that was the big rumor thing. I mean, people actually had. I mean, again, this could have been mocked up and faked, but like images of the actual X3800 box with both the Odyssey and the Dirac logo on there.
It could happen, but I mean, you sign contracts with somebody like Odyssey, I'm pretty sure
wasn't there a thing where like Sound United kind of like owned not Odyssey in general, because Odyssey still has their like automotive thing that was separate, but like didn't they kind of like end up owning or at least being like a majority stakeholder in the home version of Odyssey or something like that?
Why would they want to have their competitor in there as well? That just doesn't.
Well, because it's like it's an optional add-on, and I guess once you're getting up into this price range and the 11-channel stuff, it's like it is the enthusiast crowd that's going after this. This isn't your entry-level crowd that couldn't possibly care about that stuff, and it's like, it's just it's what the people want. Whether it's actually going to be better or not, people want.
If you wanted to make me believe this, you would have to say that this was available on the Marantz and not the Denon. I think that would be how you would convince me.
Well, then again, inside they're virtually the same, except for maybe that preamplification circuit inside the Marantz. So, yeah, I mean, this would
$1,000 difference in price.
I know this would be the thing that would let you use a microphone of your choosing connected to your laptop. I mean, to get the full suite of Dirac Live plus Dirac Live bass management is likely an $800 upgrade. Adding just Dirac Live by itself is probably around $300. So it's a substantial amount of money to put on there. For $200, you could add Odyssey Multi-EQ XT, or Multi-EQ X, right? That's what it's called. Sorry, the computer version, although that one still uses the Odyssey microphone that comes packed in and plugs directly into the AV receiver, not a microphone of your choosing to plug into your laptop. So, giving options, I think, is what's going on here. I mean, well, it'll get confirmed at the beginning of October if they're adding the ability to optionally introduce Dirac to their higher end AV receivers. That will definitely be something they talk about. So that's the big rumor. We'll see if it comes true.
The Marantz Cinema 40 for a supposed whopping $3,500 would replace the SR7015 and would have a sister model, the 4800H, which would only cost $2,000. So that
seems too low.
That seems silly. Supposedly higher watts per channel and additional HDMI 2.1 ports compared to the Cinema 50 and the 3800H. Otherwise, the same feature set, but made in Japan.
Yeah.
Okay. Whatever.
I mean,
this is sounding more and more unlikely as we go on.
Well, I mean, that's carrying through. The SR7015 had the same feature set as the SR6015, except in the Marantz lineup, the SR7015 had the full-sized front panel behind a little flap, and then the higher wattage. So this is common. The X4800H really didn't offer feature-wise anything over the X3800H, which is why we were always recommending the 3800H and pretty much never mentioned the 4800H. So this has been the way that Marantz and Denon have been in their lineups. If they're just continuing that on, it's not a big surprise. Again, that big price delta between the Marantz version versus the Denon version, with the Denon version actually going down in price compared to the X4700H, and then the Cinema 40 going way up in price compared to the SR7015 that it's replacing. So all of this is rumor. All of this is, supposed information. So we'll see how much of it pans out.
Okay. And then finally, Marantz will supposedly have new expensive separates. The Marantz AV10 is rumored to be priced at $7,000. But for the first time, Marantz will support 15 speakers, plus have those 4 subwoofer outputs to allow for a 9.4.6 configuration. Again, it's supposed to come with Odyssey Multi-EQ XT32, but with the option to pay extra to add Dirac Live and Dirac Live bass management. Then on the amplifier side of things, a matching Amp 10, also for $7,000, will supposedly come with 16 channels of Class D amplification. No rumor on replacements for the SR8015 or X6700H, or on a new flagship 15-channel receiver to go along with that AV10 Pre-Pro on the Denon side. I don't know. I know. I don't know. I still don't believe this Dirac stuff. It could happen. I would be more likely to if you had said that they're going to release a new version of Odyssey for the upper echelons of the Denon and the Marantz that had, more floating point and ability to use your own mic and maybe something else. I might.
And I'm pretty sure Multi-Q-X is where they're staying for the foreseeable future. They have said with Multi-Q-X they are going to continue developing that software. One of the reasons they priced it and licensed it the way that they did is because you're never going to have to pay extra for those updates. Once you get that license, you'll just get the updates for as long as they continue making them. So I think Multi-Q-X is sort of where Odyssey is gonna stay in its development for the foreseeable future. I mean, keep in mind here, even if this whole Dirac Live optional upgrade is true, I mean, that is going to be using Dirac's algorithms and Dirac's calculations on your laptop, but ultimately it's uploading the end filter that it calculates into the Denon receiver, which still has the exact same complement of FIR filters built in that Odyssey is using. So it's not as though the thing that is actually applying the correction is changing in any way. It's the same bank of FIR filters that are built into that Denon or Marantz AV receiver or pre-pro. It's just that the software calculating what those FIR filters are going to do, optionally, you might be able to change that if these rumors are true. So I find it a little bit, I mean, I can understand with that supposed $7,000 amp 10 being 16 channels, which doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense since 15 speakers are the maximum outputs you would have. And so you end up with one channel left over, but they're probably stereo modules. They're probably stereo Class D modules. So that would kind of make sense. So maybe that's what's going on there. 16 amplifier channels built into one chassis seems a bit ridiculous, but Class D would be more efficient. So that's the rumor. It would be $14,000 to get the two of those together. I mean, that's getting right up into the competitive landscape of much higher end brands. So yeah, I mean, $7,000 for the 15.4 channel pre-pro, that's well more expensive than Monoprice's HTP1, which is 9.1.6, not 9.4.6, but still well more expensive than Emotiva's 15 channel offerings. So, if that's what they're doing, they're certainly not coming in as the value proposition for your 15 speaker setup. That's going to be interesting if that's what they do.
All right, over at IFA, whatever that is. I don't know.
Most people say IFA, but that's the big show over in Germany.
Yeah. Anyways, their 2022 show. LG showed off their 42-inch OLED Flex monitor. It's basically a C2 OLED, but at the push of a button on this remote, you can bend the screen to make it curved with 20 steps from flat to maximum of a 900R curvature. And Corsair announced a similar bendable OLED monitor with their Xenon Flex, which uses LG's display's new 45-inch ultra-wide OLED panels. So, in the world of flexible monitors, the only one that has ever made sense is a computer monitor where you will be sitting in exactly the right spot for the curve. Adjusting the curve based on where you're sitting makes sense, and I would still never use it.
I mean, this certainly seems like something that will be adjusted once and then never touched again, and that one-time adjustment will, I mean, you'll play with it when you first get it, because everybody would. Who wouldn't push the button and watch the thing with a motor curve itself and then bring itself back to flat? I would, of course, just get the flat one, because I never want a curved monitor. If you want a curved monitor, you'll set this to one of those available 20 steps and leave it there. But anyway, it was a fun thing to show off. It's always the type of thing that makes a good demo.
Right. IFA 2022 also offered a bunch of new soundbar announcements, which to the excitement of only people who don't know anything about home theater. Sennheiser updated their AMBEO is better. Soundbar line. The original AMBEO soundbar is now the AMBEO Max.
Of course it is. Wait until you get a load of the next name.
Priced at $2,500. Now they're introduced the smaller AMBEO Plus, which is somehow smaller. Priced at $1,500. Both aim to replicate the sound of a full 7.14 Atmos and DTS-X setup. Sure it does. All from a single bar up at the front of your room. It works exactly as well as actually having speakers. Said nobody. Up to 4 AMBEO subs, $700 each. Because why would you want to buy an SVS when you could buy one of these? Can be wirelessly connected to the soundbar. Yeah, you might as well connect them wirelessly because they're not going to make the right sounds anyways.
The specs say they go down to 27 hertz, Tom, for $700 a piece.
I'm sure those drivers do move at 27 hertz.
At least you can connect 4 of them. It's better than just 1, which is the limit of most other soundbars. But yeah, I just got a kick out of the names that the original AMBEO soundbar is now the soundbar Max, the AMBEO Max, and then the smaller one is the AMBEO Plus. So Sennheiser soundbars have garnered lots and lots of favorable reviews. I think you're spending quite a bit of money. I mean, if it's the AMBEO Plus at $1,500 plus, let's say 2 subwoofers, another $1,400. You're telling me that for $2,900 you couldn't put together a pretty decent AV receiver and sound system? Maybe not with a Marantz in the mix, since they've gotten so much more expensive, according to the rumors. But yeah, I'm thinking that for pretty much $3,000 you could do a full sound system. But anyway, that's what's going on with Sennheiser's AMBEO soundbars.
TCL is getting into the 7.1.4 flagship soundbar. I don't think you can put the word flagship in front of soundbar game with their X93 937U.
It's such a memorable name.
At least in Europe, TCL, where it will be priced at $800. It should be priced $937. Shut up. You're stupid. Well, 800 euros.
800 euro, yeah. I mean, very often that just ends up being the same in US dollars if it comes across here. But yeah, this is looks very similar to Vizio's offerings, where they've got the wireless, not completely wireless, you still have to plug them into power, but the wireless satellite speakers to go at the rear of your room, then the supposed 5-channel soundbar that goes up at the front of your room, and the wireless subwoofer, of course. So yeah, TCL giving you a 7.1.4 solution that should be much more affordable.
It comes with a pair of wireless rear speakers that include upward firing drivers and a single wireless sub. JBL announced 4 new BAR capital for all of them, because of course they are series soundbars. The top of the line BAR 1000, and if it doesn't serve drinks, it's not doing its job as far as I'm concerned. Offers truly wireless rear speakers. Not truly, because you still have to plug them in.
These ones are truly wireless.
Oh, so they're battery powered?
They're battery powered.
You still have to plug them in.
Well, yes, that's
charge them.
Keep on reading.
With upward firing drivers that recharge when plugged into the sides of the main soundbar. Still have to plug them in.
And I mean, guess how often people plug them in to recharge and then pull them off the sides of the bar and redeploy them to the back of the room and then bring them back when they need a recharge.
Never. They're never going to do that. This is the 2 options. They're always going to be attached to that soundbar, and the people will say, I didn't even know those came off. Mm-hmm. And then while in the same breath telling you how good the surround system is.
Sure.
And then the other option is they take them off, they put them at the back of the room, and then they just die.
That's right.
Back there.
And no one ever notices that even though they're back there, they're not making sound anymore because they haven't been recharged in 2 years.
So with the rear speakers deployed, you get a full 7.1.4 Atmos and DTS-X configuration priced at 1150 euros. And just for your edification, we will include a link to my article entitled, over at AV Gadgets, Just Stop with the Atmos Soundbars, because that is an article I wrote in May of 2021 after having to deal with a couple of these types of announcements and just getting freaking irritated with them. So yes, just stop. Okay, what is the point of the Atmos soundbar? That point is that they are not doing anything different than any other soundbar that came before it who claimed to do surround sound. It's all the same technology. Nothing has changed.
Some of them do have, the physically upward firing driver that wasn't in the 5.1 or 7.1 soundbars.
I think it's more of a psychological effect than it is a physical effect that's in there. I have an article about how to place Atmos speakers, like upward firing Atmos speakers, and you can't just shove them on top of a speaker and say it's going to work. It's more than that to get them to upward firing speakers to work properly. That's why you have some people who are like, they don't work at all. And other people are like, they work great. It's because they put them on top of their normal speakers, or they're built into their normal speakers, and they get lucky or they don't get lucky. Right. Either way, that explains why their experiences are so different. And this garbage is just essentially, they can spend 25 cents per driver, throw a couple of extra drivers, maybe 10 extra drivers in there. It doesn't matter to them. 10 extra drivers. That's like, what, $250? Right? So they or $5 or whatever, they put that much extra money in, and they can charge you $500 extra because now it's an Atmos thing. It's marketing. It's garbage. Just go get yourself, if you're going to get a sound bar, just admit to what it really is. It is a way of making dialogue louder. That is what you want. You just want a little bit better sound than what comes out of the TV. Just go get a cheap sound bar that is just a sound bar, not an Atmos, not a surround, not a bunch of other stuff. Just get the sound bar that makes things louder, because that one literally is the best way to get this to what you actually want. All this pseudo surround garbage, it's not helping you. It's not helping you. Just stop. Just stop. All right, let's get to our questions here, so that we can get to a question where I can get some more iced coffee. That was the empty cup of my iced coffee.
So
I clearly need more caffeine. Kiran from India. Kiran and his cousin recently visited a TV retailer showroom to get a demonstration of some 8K TVs. Kiran has been curious to see if they live up to the hype, and his cousin had bought into the marketing and really thought he wanted one. They had some demo 8K material, and yes, I have no idea where you got this 8K material. You must have downloaded it because it doesn't.
The showroom had it on. They always have those loops of 8K shot in 8K material. I don't doubt that. They always have that.
They say, and yes, it looked amazing and superior to what Kiran and his cousin get to see at home on their TVs, but then Kiran asked them to put on some regular 1080p Blu-rays and streaming 4K content, stuff that is more in line with what he'd actually be watching. When all the content was being upscaled to 8K TVs, it just looked average, not best on par with the 4K TVs that were also in the showroom. Shocking no one. Furthermore, when they paced it out and looked at the 65-inch model from about 10 feet away, which is closer than their typical setups at home, neither of them can make out any difference at all between a 4K TV and an 8K TV. I can't say this enough. If you're not seeing pixels at home, you do not need higher resolution. If you sit in your chair and you look up and you don't see a pixel...
I mean,
making the things you don't see smaller doesn't really make that much of a difference.
Maybe not as far as individual pixels, because that would be very, very ridiculously close. But yes, I mean, the whole point of originally 1080p resolution was that you could be, 32 degrees is the mathematical limit of if your eyes were making out every possible detail of, 1 arc second of or arc minute rather of difference in the angle between say a black and then a white and then a black pixel again. So I mean that was 1080p. So that was a 32 degree field of view, meaning to get that same difference of literally being able to see 1 white pixel next to a black pixel next to a white pixel, you'd have to be at a 64 degree field of view with 2160p with 4K resolution, ultra high definition resolution. So then 8K, you'd have to have a 128 degree field of view. I mean, how close are we getting? So yes, 10 feet away from a 65-inch, you're definitely not going to see the difference.
So Kiran can understand the retailers and TV makers wanting to have something to hype up. You can understand how an 8K TV might win in a TV shootout with carefully controlled conditions and specific content. But given the content we will actually watch every day, is there any way to actually vouch for getting an 8K TV? 16K, of course, has already been mentioned. When 16K TVs come out, they will undoubtedly be hyped as being the best. Kiran would like to hear our thoughts. For his part, this demo didn't convince him that he needs to worry about 8K, let alone 16K right now. I will point you over to AV Gadgets again, where I wrote another enlightening article entitled, 8K displays are stupid. So... I think that will tell you what I think about them, but the reality is it doesn't matter what you experienced. Eventually, 8K TVs are going to be the norm, and you're not going to have an option.
Simply much because like how if you're getting anything larger than 55 inches today, try and get it as a 1080p, right? It's gonna be 4K or 8K. So I do agree. Eventually, that's just sort of the way the march is gonna go. But I'll let Tom finish his thoughts.
No, I totally agree that the problem with the resolution increase and the resolution creep is that is something that people understand. They know that 1080p is not as good as 4K, and they know that 8K is a bigger number than 4K, so therefore it must be better. That's what they know. So
it's a very simplified shorthand that is super easy to market.
Now, what they don't understand is the difference between the different types of backlighting, the different motion smoothing techniques. They have the black frame insertions. They don't understand HDR at all. HDR is way too hard for people to understand. I mean, hell, I barely get it. I mean, I get it, but I'm certainly not getting enough that I can sit down with somebody and walk them through the entire process without having to get my mind straight before I do so. So it's just not easy shorthand for the marketers. The marketers need to be able to put something on there that is very short, that people just glance at and go, this one's better than that one because of that number or that statement right there. And that the same thing happens with cars. The same thing happens with bikes. The same thing happened with thread counts, right? My wife and I went shopping for some sheets because my son moved out and we wanted to put new non-boy slept in sheets on the bed for our guest who's coming to stay with us during her cancer treatments. And my wife's like, oh, well, which one should we get, this 800 thread count or the 400 thread count? I'm like, I remember reading that thread count crap is all marketing hype and garbage. And she's like, are you sure? I'm like, no, that's why I said I remember reading it.
Right.
Look it up. And sure enough, she looked it up and she's like, yeah, it's pretty much all crap. It's just a number that gets bigger and people understand bigger. I'm like, welcome to the wonderful worlds of watts and receivers, because that's exactly the same thing that goes on there. So that it's just shorthand. And unfortunately, you get these people who they'll see two TVs side by side. One is bigger, one is smaller. They both say 4K, and the price is lower for the bigger one. And they're like, okay, well, this is 4K, and this is 4K, which means they must be the same as far as performance. Yeah,
that's exactly.
But this one is cheaper and bigger. Ha! I am outsmarting the system that's going on here. I am smarter than the people who put the prices on the thing. So I'm going to get the cheap one and take it home. And then they're posting online. Why does my black screen look cloudy?
Yeah, if you look at the sales figures, definitely people go for size and price. Lower price, larger size. But people do, like today, want it to say 4K, right? That is a thing that people look for. They will, if there's two TVs that are the same size and there's one of them is 1080p and the other one is 4K and the 1080p one is only $50 cheaper or something like that, that's where they'll pay the $50 more to get the 4K, as long as the size is the same and the price is only marginally higher. So it's that type of marketing. But I mean, most people aren't understanding that amongst 4K TVs, there's a tremendous difference in the image quality that has nothing to do with the 4K resolution. Right. There is no reason why you could not have a 1080p resolution television that looks a lot better than a 4K TV. If you had a 1080p OLED 65-inch versus a 65-inch LCD 4K, that 1080p OLED is going to look better in, I would say, every circumstance, short of, nose to the screen. And even then, it's not going to make that much of a difference just on the resolution. So the 8K marketing, the 8K resolution has to be one of the least important things in my mind, right? Would I take an 8K resolution edge-lit LCD TV over a 4K resolution OLED? Absolutely not. I'm going to go for the 4K OLED every single time in that matchup. But people just see 4K versus 8K. So definitely, we don't have to worry about Kiran himself, but your cousin, if he's, worried about this 8K marketing, I'm glad you got to see the demo. I'm glad he got to see with his own eyes, like, okay, 8K didn't make the difference. The resolution is last thing to worry about. 4K TVs were kind of in danger of not having anything compelling until it was like HDR and OLED and, local dimming, full array local dimming backlights. Like, those are the things that made the visible differences. Like I say, I would easily take those things over the increase in resolution. I'd take those on a 1080p panel any day of the week and not worry about the resolution bumps. So the last thing I'll say on it is, of course, whatever is newest and most expensive does tend to get the best of all the technologies, right? So if you're looking at the more expensive 8K TV, it's very often, well, that's the one that has the more local dimming zones. That's the one that has the most advanced type of panel on it. It's those types of things that are making the actual visible difference if there is one. Samsung's lineup is a perfect example. If you want the very best backlighting technology they have, the very widest quantum dot colors that they have, well, it's in their 8K TVs now. They've kind of nerfed some of their 4K TV models, not because it couldn't be put in there, but because they kind of want to have some reason to draw your eye to the 8K more expensive models. But it's not the 8K resolution that's doing it. It's all the other things, particularly like the backlight.
There you go. Dave. Dave's mom has a TCL Roku TV, and she uses the built-in Roku apps, but her internet service isn't the greatest, so there's buffering and pauses sometime. Is there a way to set the TV to only ever stream in 720p quality so that the playback experience will remain smoother by using less bandwidth? I feel like in Netflix you can do that, but you have to do it from the
from a
online,
web browser
the
on
web
your computer.
browser. Yeah, I don't know about the rest of the services, but I don't know that there's a way to globally do it from a TV's menu.
Yeah, from the built-in apps of the TV, I couldn't find anything in some of the manuals I perused or in the FAQ help online for TCL. There's no indication that for the built-in apps that you can globally limit the resolution of the streaming services. As Tom just mentioned, app by app, there are sometimes the options to do that. Netflix, you have to actually go to a web browser on your computer or mobile device and log in that way and set things in your account to limit the resolution. YouTube, of course, you can select the resolution that's playing back on each video itself as it's going. In the case of Amazon Prime, there is a way to set that in your account, but only on Fire TV devices. They don't let you do it on other types of streaming devices, on just a lone app basis. And then for other apps, HBO Max, Paramount Plus, Peacock, etc., I don't really know. But it would have to be on an app-by-app basis as far as I can tell for the built-in apps. So if Dave's mom likes the Roku interface, which I could understand, it's one of the simpler and cleaner and nicer interfaces, but you want to be able to globally limit what the streaming services are outputting in terms of resolution, I think, interestingly, getting like a Roku stick and plugging that in would be the way that you can do it. Because certainly with an outboard Roku stick, you can set manually the output resolution, and then everything will be limited to that. So I think that's probably the best solution. If she's willing to consider a new interface and learn a new interface, of course, you can consider an Amazon Fire TV stick or an Apple TV or an NVIDIA Shield or something like that. But I'm betting...
I was going to say, yeah, the Apple TVs and the NVIDIA Shields, I know. Yeah, I mean, it feels like you can do that from the menu there.
Yeah, pretty much any of the external, any of the external streaming devices, you can manually set the resolution, but not the ones built into the TV as far as we're aware.
Okay. John. Way back when John first got in touch with us, he had it in mind to build himself some tall rectangular DIY subwoofers, and he was going to Velcro them to the ground since he needs to keep them as lightweight as possible for the sake of his back. I don't really remember this, but I'm sure it's fine. After many discussions,
we talked to John many times. That was the really long room, and then we were looking at his plans. Remember those ones that had no internal bracing for the
I guess
DIY.
The Velcro didn't stick in my mind. It seems like that would have been something that would have stuck in my mind.
One of the details.
Okay. After many discussions, he's now on his way to making some DIY cylinder SonoTube subs. Instead, he's followed some popular online plans that include a round base with some feet to provide clearance for the downward firing subwoofer driver. He intends to put some rubber padding on the bottom of the base. He's read through so many plans that a lot of the advice has become a bit vague in his memory, so he's hoping we can offer some input. He thinks he's read some concern about back pressure within the cylinder, particularly in regards to the port. That led him to be concerned about bracing the long port tube inside the cylinder, but having openings in the internal bracing to allow for airflow. Can we share any comments on that? Okay, first of all, we are not speaker designers. I can't stress that enough. But second, so what's going on here is he's got if you think of the SVS downward firing cylinder subs, he's got the driver mounted and above, it looks like above a bottom plate.
That's
just
right.
Like the SVSs do. It does look like there's a hole in the middle.
Used to anyway.
Yeah. Well, mine do.
Yours do, but the PC 2000 and PC 4000 no longer have that bottom plate. They just have the subwoofer isolation feet on the bottom of them, and the driver firing down into whatever floor you have. But the models that they replaced, going back, the cylinder subs from SVS used to have base plates. So the design that John is going with includes a base plate, and then 4 legs that makes sure that the driver is some height above that base plate. But he's showing sort of an internal view diagram that he's mocked up that would include some bracing inside for the port tube.
I thought the whole point of the cylinder subs is that you didn't need as much or any bracing because...
Well, that was the irony, right? When he first talked to us and showed us his plans for his box subwoofers, the very first thing we said was, where's all the bracing inside? For the box subwoofer, he basically had sort of like a curved... I guess sort of like a line, transmission line, like a line port inside that had some curves in it, but that was basically the only form of internal bracing that his original plans had. We were like, we know we're trying to keep it lightweight and you're trying to make this sort of tall form factor, but there's got to be bracing inside the box. So ironically, he's now come to a design that we mentioned where, like, with the cylinder subs, you could keep the weight down, you can keep the tall height and the small footprint. That's kind of the whole point of the cylinder design, but you can keep it lighter weight because by virtue of the geometric shape of the cylinder, the internal pressure stays very constant. You don't need all that extra bracing. But then he, somewhere in the back of his mind, heard something about back pressure from, you got the driver inside and then you've got this port, and he's like, I don't want that port shaking around inside. So he's put in his plans internal bracing that I'm going to say you don't need. The
whole point of having the port is that the back pressure goes out the port.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, that's the whole point.
Look at the plans that he's following. It's quite simple. You've got the sono tube that's providing the outside, enclosure for the subwoofer, and then you just have a top plate and a bottom plate. The bottom plate, of course, has the driver, holding the driver that is firing downward, and then the top plate has the port tube inside of it, firing upward, and that's it. It's very simple. It's lightweight. Enjoy the simplicity. That was the whole idea behind the cylinder sub design.
Yeah, it seems like you're overcomplicating. You overcorrected. He says, does there need to be a certain distance between the back of the driver and the bottom of the port? No. That'd be enough for the air to get through, I suppose.
You obviously wouldn't.
You don't want any whistling, I guess. I wouldn't want it right there, but no. I mean, it's about the internal volume of the subwoofer, and then the length of the port has to do with the tuning of the sound that comes out. So you tune the port based on the response you get from the driver.
Yeah, and when we say tuning the port, that's the combination of the diameter of the port versus the diameter of the sonotube and driver, and the length of the port. That's what we're referring to when we talk about tuning. And I mean, within the plans that he's following, there is this SonoSub design program software that lets you plug in the dimensions, the diameter and length of the outside enclosure, the sonotube itself, and then allows you to select, okay, if I want this tuning frequency given those dimensions, what do I need in terms of the diameter and length of the port inside? And it spits out those results for you to follow. So he's already familiar with that. If you follow those plans and don't try to do something ridiculous like have a 3-foot tall cylinder with a 10 hertz tuning. Like that's not going to work. You're going to have a crazy bending port inside, likely with a diameter too wide to even physically fit. So you have to keep things within reason. But if you're doing the sort of typical design of about a 16 or 18-inch diameter sono tube that's about 4 feet tall, and then you're going for 20 hertz or even, 18 hertz type tuning, that all fits really quite easily within those types of dimensions, and the design software will absolutely spit out those figures for you.
What sort of stuffing should be inside? Polyfill, like we mentioned last week, or should the inside of the cylinder be lined with padded or insulation, like what's shown on the online plans? I think that I would line it if it were me, simply because the polyfill is going to. I mean, they're tall.
Yeah, that's
it's going to compress eventually towards the bottom. So yeah, I would line it so that it would stay, and that's what I would do.
Yeah, this is one we did mention polyfill for, like backer boxes for sealed speakers.
Yeah, but those are so small. The internal volume is so small.
That's where that makes sense. For these ones, I would stick basically with the plans, where it's going to be, I would probably just go with rock wool insulation, to be honest, or a slightly rigid fiberglass and line the inside of it. I mean, if we look inside of our own SVS cylinder subs, they aren't just like packed full of polyfill. They have some stuffing in there, but it's basically lined in there. So that's what I would do with that.
So he's used the SonoSub design program to help him plan the diameters and lengths of both the outer sonotube and the inner port. He'll be using an external Crown XLS amplifier and a 10-band parametric EQ. He also has Room EQ Wizard to take measurements should he have any concern about port chuffing if he cranks these subs as loud as they can go. Well, yeah. I think that's the case with any ported sub. You should always worry about port chuffing if you crank it as loud as it could go. But the point here is that you're going to make a sub that's going to be able to play at reference level without having to be at the absolute max volume that your amplifier can put out and the sub can handle. So, don't, I guess, would be my option.
What's working to his advantage.
The sub.
Yeah, what's working to his advantage here is if you are using that design software, and again, keeping your targets somewhat reasonable, if you've done that, then you should be, just by the geometry and the physical sizes of the port versus the diameter and length of the sonotube itself, you should be avoiding most of the issues that way by using that design software and not putting a completely mismatched port into the sonotube. And then when you also have those Crown XLS amplifiers that have some filtering ability built into them, plus the 10 bands of parametric EQ that he talked about, like, if you do run with Room EQ Wizard or even just your own ears and notice at a particular frequency a nasty resonance or something like that, you can tame that with that parametric EQ. There's really nothing stopping you from cutting down a nasty resonance, which is not impossible, but that is certainly something you could tune. So I'm not foreseeing any reason why port chuffing, if it were to happen, isn't something that you could mitigate quite easily with the filtering that you have on hand. So I'm not worried about port chuffing if you followed that design software.
All right. Should he use regular paint on the outside for finish, or should he spray on Duratex? I'd wrap it in fabric. Call it a day. That's what
I guess for like
the
base plate and the top plate, those aren't going to be fabric wrapped. So yeah, it's MDF. You can cover that with just about anything.
I mean, it's kind of up to you. What are you comfortable doing?
Yeah, it really is.
What are you more comfortable doing? I mean,
some people put a veneer finish on there if they're skilled with doing that, right? So yeah, I'm not going to say there's one that's certainly not from a performance standpoint. Is there going to be any difference? This would strictly be about aesthetic looks and how durable you want it to be. I'm not really into building DIY speakers. That's a bit more beyond my time and capabilities, but I would probably just do like a Duratex finish because it's a little bit more durable. It's got that little bit of a texture to it, and then you can kind of be not super skilled and make that look okay, since it's like textured and a little bit uneven naturally. So I'm not too worried that I might not get the finish absolutely perfect with Duratex. So that would be me, but no reason you can't go with whatever finish you want.
He says, on to a different topic. Have either of us seen the recent Showtime series, The Man Who Fell to Earth? So far, he's sold. No.
I have not either. No. I remember the David Bowie version, but that's definitely not the new updated series.
Is it not based on like a Heinlein or whatever article? That was something else?
Oh, okay. I don't know.
He also asked, what about Stargate SG-1? He used to own the entire series on DVD, but he sold all of his DVDs a while ago, figuring he'd be fine with streaming. Might be a little short-sighted there. But the streaming versions are stereo only, when even the DVDs had 5.1. Do we think getting the series on Blu-ray would be worth it? I mean, if you love this, are you going to watch them again? I guess that's the thing.
This is all about how much you love the series. I mean, I was never a Stargate TV series fan, even though those were all shot in my neighborhood. when I was going to university for a couple of years there, they were always shooting Stargate up there at the university I went to. That was all the exterior scenes is the university I attended, so they were always around in there. Not super high-end looking costumes, so I mean, from that point of view, given that the budget on that TV show was not tremendous, I'm thinking even on Blu-ray that some of the little bit of low budgetness of the visual effects and the special effects and the costuming and that might show up a bit. But honestly, I mean, if this is a series that you love and you want to have it in your collection, then yeah, I would get it on Blu-ray. That's going to be the best format it's ever available in. So sure.
I mean, I liked it fine. I used to watch it. I don't think I ever super followed it, but especially in reruns, it's a show that if I was looking for something to watch and it was flipping around, it would be one I would stop on. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's fine. Aras is nearing completion of his DIY backer boxes for his in-ceiling KEF speakers. He is hoping to mount them on his ceiling as flush as possible, since he doesn't want them hanging down too much. They're going to end up fairly heavy once the speaker drivers are installed, about 22 pounds. A carpenter friend of his suggested using French cleats to secure them onto the ceiling. He's all ears if we have any other ideas or suggestions. I've never heard of using French cleats for a ceiling mount.
I mean, you need two, right? You need two, right? And then kind of slide it in from the side. Yeah.
That is far beyond my technical capabilities of doing, because there's no world in which I mount those cleats and then slide that thing on there, and it is secure and also doesn't vibrate.
If you have a carpenter friend helping you, though,
yes,
then that might
be. They should do it. Yes, make them do it.
But I'm a little bit like, is there a way that we could have some damping, some decoupling, some vibration damping? Because a French cleat wouldn't provide that. Although you could do a French cleat design that maybe has just like a little bit of a rubber, type of
play in it.
Yeah, a little thing.
You put a rubber.
Yeah.
Insulation tape or something there.
Yeah, a little bit of a bumper in there. So I'm not opposed to that idea. I think if you did do sort of a rubberized surface in between the two sides of the French cleat, that might be pretty hard to slide on, but you'd only have to do it once. So I'm not opposed to that. One idea that came to mind for me is over at ISO Store, they have their hush frame. This is normally used for attaching like furring strips to your wall and ceiling studs or your joists, so that you can decouple the surface of your walls. This is an alternative to sound clips and hat channels, is the hush frame. So I mean, it is just a couple of pieces of wood with a rubber joint in between them, or might be like a siliconized rubber joint in between them to provide that vibration damping. But I was thinking like those would be pretty easy to attach to your ceiling. Visually, I guess you'd want like the faceplate of your DIY speakers to extend so that they'd hide these, right? But you could sort of attach these to the ceiling and then screw in from the side, from the inside, the backer boxes for the speakers you've created into these. So that is a way that could functionally work. Visually, though, I think the French cleats probably would look a bit better. Although if they're on the back, then that's going to add a little bit of extra depth, whereas the hush frame method wouldn't have to. But then you'd want to, like I say, visually probably extend the faceplate of the speakers that you're making so that they'd hide them.
All right. I clicked on the wrong thing. So I opened this hush plate thing. He's concerned that he should be aiming the on-ceiling speakers towards the main listening. Why?
This is like got to be one of the most common things that everybody just thinks it has to be done.
Okay, he's concerned that he should be aiming the on-ceiling speakers towards the main listening position, but any angle will mean part of the speakers are hanging down lower. Would just a 5 or 10 degree tilt be okay? How about a 0 degree tilt? Because that's what you're supposed to do.
I mean,
a
particularly
0
with
degree.
KEF in-ceiling speakers that have the really even wide dispersion. Of all the speakers, those are my least concern about just firing them straight down. That's what we would do anyway. But particularly with KEF in-ceilings, I have zero concerns about just firing them straight down. So that no tilt whatsoever. If you were going to do a tilt, I don't think a 5 or 10 degree tilt is worth it whatsoever if you're going to do a tilt, and it's something like you have golden ear in-ceiling speakers with the much more directional tweeters. Well, then those I want the 20 or 30 degree tilt that you're going to need to actually aim them right at your head. So I definitely wouldn't do a 5 or 10 degree tilt. That isn't worth it. But with KEF in-ceilings, I'm pointing those straight down, and I am not worrying one little bit.
I know that you see the images online and you see the original Dolby diagrams where they're angled, everything's pointed straight at the main listening position. Just ignore it. Do your
I don't want to get into a whole flame war thing because I'm not into that whatsoever. But I mean, there was a video posted on YouTube that really went in depth looking at not just the Dolby Atmos for home white paper that Dolby has out there, but the Dolby Atmos for studio and the Dolby Atmos for cinema, like full-size cinema setups, and really looking at, because in the studio version and the cinema version, they get much more into precise angles of, exactly how far to the sides the Atmos speakers are supposed to be in terms of an angle, and also like relating them to, if your surround speakers are mounted this high on the sidewall, then there should be this much more of an angle between the sidewall speakers and the overhead speakers in the studio and cinema versions, and they aren't as specific with specific given differences and angles in the home version, and saying, okay, if this is what they use to make the content in the studio and this is the setup that we're supposed to have in the cinema, then why aren't we following those same guidelines at home? And I was like, well, because even in your own demonstration, you ended up with the situation where in a fairly compact home theater that isn't super wide, if you follow those studio and cinema angle guidelines, they'd work for the one seat in the middle, but you'd quickly end up with the situation where your top left speaker ended up to the right of the listener on the left side of the couch, right? And you're not supposed to have both the top left and the top right speaker to your right-hand side, both of them. I mean, this is why in the Dolby diagrams for the home, the surround back speakers look a little bit farther apart than we might think surround back speakers were supposed to go, particularly back in the THX days where they had that THX surround back listening array where they were very close together, like what Tom has in his theater. But in the Dolby diagrams, they have the surround back speakers looking kind of far apart because they're like, well, if you got a 3-seater couch, we want the surround back left speaker to be the left of the listener on the left side of the couch, not both surround back speakers to their right or both overhead speakers to their right. So all of this, we have to live in the real world a little bit. Tom and I will always say, instead of worrying so much about precise angles of your overhead speakers and really precise placement and aiming of your Atmos speakers of all things, we just want the general idea that this sound is above, in front, and to the left, or above, behind, and to the right. Like, we want that general sense because Atmos effects just aren't that important, and they just aren't that noticeable, and we don't want to get so stringent into angles of positioning and aiming that we end up with the out of bounds situation where both things that are supposed to be one to your left and one to your right both end up on your right or both end up on your left on a 3-seater couch. That really doesn't make sense. So that's my piece on that. And in your case, don't worry. Mount them on the ceiling, point them straight down.
Right. Karl, we talked about the potential pet-friendly flooring options for Karl's future Vanta Black Theater. He'd like to know about the effects of various flooring materials will have on sound quality. Could cork flooring actually be a good option from an acoustic standpoint? I'm going to finish reading, then we can come back to that. He's got allergies and considers himself a clean freak, so he can't fathom wall-to-wall carpet. I'm sure you can fathom it. You just don't want to.
He doesn't want it, yes.
Sure, you can fathom it. But if it would be better for the acoustics, he would consider a partially carpeted room, like maybe the perimeter is carpet. That's not the right place to carpet it. But and everywhere else is hard flooring material. So cork would be better if you were worried about footfalls below, from above. If the flooring for the upstairs is cork, that would help with footfall noise coming through.
His detached garage.
Yeah.
So the theater is above the garage. He's not worried about sound going down from the theater into the garage, and there's nothing above them. So that's not really the concern.
If you're going to put something on the floor, you want something that is absorptive if you can. Which in our case normally we talk about carpets with thick pads underneath. The thicker the better, and the idea is that it will absorb more sound. The carpet really doesn't do much. The pad does marginally more.
Right.
And therefore, having the carpet at the perimeter and the hard wood or hard flooring in the center is the exact opposite of what you want.
Yeah,
you want
the
carpet between your couch and your speakers so that it'll catch the floor bounce. And
of course, the alternative, if you already have hard flooring, would be a rug with as thick a pad as you can manage underneath it. Now, that's always, leads to the idea that it could be a little bit of a tripping hazard. Of course, the pad you would make smaller than the rugs, and then you could secure down the edges of the rug, so then you kind of got a little rise in it, but that's sort of the alternative there. This room being built from the ground up, though, if I were going to do all this, I might do the thing where most of it is a hard surface if that's what you prefer. But for that, what's essentially the first reflection point of the floor for your front speakers, rather than just doing the whole floor hard and then having a rug that would be, a little bit elevated on the floor once you put a thick, like 1/2-inch felt pad under there is about as big as they get. You could have, that area where the rug carpet area is going to go, that could actually be a little bit sunken as compared to the rest of the floor, and then you could install carpet in there with a nice thick pad underneath. Acoustically speaking, that's probably your best bet. The argument of course goes that if you do wall-to-wall carpet, then you have acoustically treated a large amount of surface area, but only at a thickness that's effective at higher frequencies.
Right.
So that leads to the thing where, what you really need to focus on then for your wall and potentially ceiling treatments is bass trapping, and then maybe the first reflection points on the side, back, wall would be the things that you would do. But just in that, you would have reached that sort of 30% of the total surface area, but you've got this large area with the wall-to-wall carpet that's really only treating the high frequencies. So for the people who are very concerned about getting that recommended RT60 line from the Dolby specs, they'll say, well, that's overdamped in only the high frequencies. And I would rather have some hard flooring in there so that we aren't covering quite as much surface area, but with a material that's only affecting high frequencies. So, I'm not against the idea that you wouldn't have wall-to-wall carpet. I'm very okay with that idea. You might end up needing some more wall treatments, to reach the tuning that you want, but that's okay in a purpose-built, dedicated theater like what Karl's going to do. But I would say that if you have just hard flooring and nothing on the floor, particularly at that first reflection point between you and the screen, between you and the front speakers, like that is something, I don't know, I guess I probably haven't done proper full blind testing to know if I really can hear that difference. But, that floor bounce is something that can be seen in measurements, if nothing else. So I like the idea that the first reflection point on the floor would have some kind of treatment. It's more important to treat the vocal and higher frequency range, so I'm fine with it being carpet and a thick pad or rug and a thick pad. And for a purpose-built room like this, I think having mostly hard flooring, but then just that section between you and the front speakers be carpet with a pad.
Okay. All right, Sean. Sean recently got a BenQ HT3550 projector. He also got a new HDMI cable, figuring he'd need one. His existing HDMI cable was 25 feet long and run inside those walls. It's maybe 8 years old, so he wasn't expecting it to even work with his new 4K HDR projector, but he gave it a try with his Chromecast, and to his surprise, the BenQ reported that it was getting a 4K 60 HDR signal in BT 2020 color. It did report that it was an 8-bit signal in 420, though, so... Should he worry that the signal wasn't 10-bit? Is there any reason he should even bother with the hassle of pulling the new HDMI cable through his walls? And how is it that the old HDMI cable is even working? BT 2020 HDR sources weren't even really around when he bought it. They didn't tell us what it was, so there's
not specifically, but we can assume it's at least a high-speed cable,
right?
Maybe not premium high-speed, maybe just high-speed.
So when you've got a 420 signal, you're basically, as opposed to like a 444. 444 is like the full, like every color gets every bit in. So what the 420 does is it's a subtractive thing. So the first color, I don't remember, was it RGB?
Well, it does. The black and white is full bandwidth. There's no reduction in the black and white part of the signal. But then the difference between black and white and blue and the difference between black and white and red, so this is our YCBCR type of signaling, this chroma difference type of signaling. Those other ones are 1/4 of the resolution of the black and white signals. So this greatly reduces how much bandwidth is needed, and perceptually we're very, very bad with our human eyes at noticing any loss in those chroma difference channels, which is exactly why they do it this way. On our discs, on our streaming services, those are all encoded in 420 chroma subsampling. It's really only computer-generated graphics from our PCs that are full 444 bandwidth. So there's really nothing wrong with having a 420 signal sent. That's what the original source material is going to be anyway. There's really no problem with that as far as, video streaming from a Chromecast goes. The 8-bit part of the thing, so technically, if you're sending a 4K HDR signal, it would have been in 10-bit. At the very least. If it's Dolby Vision, it might have been in 12-bit, or it might have been in their 8-bit tunneling thing that they do. But it would have been higher bandwidth in the original signal. In this instance, that BenQ projector, the DLP panel itself that ultimately shows the image to you, has 8-bit gradation. So it accepts a 10-bit signal, it processes the signal in 10-bit, but at the very end of it, there's a translation down to 8-bit gradation for the DLP panel itself to actually show it. So if your source device is sort of doing that 10-bit to 8-bit conversion beforehand, like on a technical level, I guess there's some image detail being lost, but it's like it was going to happen anyway. The gradation was going to get down to 8-bit gradation by your projector anyway. So in this particular instance, I'm not really worried that about what happened there. I don't think you're really losing any image quality. So there's a great tool over at Meridio.com that lets you calculate how much bandwidth you actually need for a given resolution, at a given frame rate, at a given bit depth, at a given chroma sampling. They let you put in all those parameters and work out how many bits per second you actually need to send down your HDMI cable. In the example I'm showing in the images, it's a ultra high definition 4K resolution at 120 frames per second, 10-bit full 444. That's what might be coming out of your Xbox Series X if you're running it at 120 frames per second. And you'll see that it's 40 gigabits per second. Exactly what we've talked about, that 40 gigabit per second limit in ultra high speed HDMI cables, or 48 gigabits per second is as high as the spec goes, but we're seeing these 40 gigabit per second HDMI 2.1 ports on AV receivers and televisions and that, but that's sufficient for that. If I had bumped that bit depth up to 12-bit, that's where it would have needed the 48 gigabits per second, but we don't really have to worry about that with our current signals or what's coming out of our consoles. So if we bumped that down to 4K 60, but 60 frames per second, 8-bit 420, that is like under 10 gigabits per second. That's going to work within the old HDMI 1.4 spec, which, the cable you had from 8 years ago is going to be at least that. So explaining why was your existing cable able to send 4K 60 with HDR whatsoever, Well, because by going down to 8-bit and 420, you're using less than 10 gigabits per second. That'll work through any high-speed HDMI cable. So do you need to worry about this? If you were to change your source to something other than a Chromecast, like with the NVIDIA Shield, you can manually set it to output 8-bit. I don't know if it would auto-detect that that's what's going to work through your cable. It might, by default, attempt to send a 10 or even a 12-bit signal from some HDR signals, and you might have to manually go in there and set it down to 8-bit. Depending on your source device, it might be a bit more difficult to get it to output a bandwidth that's going to work within your existing cable. So if you're sticking with this projector and your Chromecast as your primary source, like there isn't really a huge reason why you need to pull that new cable. But if you have other sources, it might just be more convenient to have the upgraded cable.
This is a perfect example of when, somebody buys, basically upgrades, right? They upgrade something, and everybody tells them they're also going to need to upgrade something else, and they get it home and they try it out and they're like, well, no, I don't. It works perfectly fine. We're like, you are so precariously balanced at the edge of performance of every single device you have. Yes, you're right. Right now, you don't need to. And I would be, I could not tell you in good conscience that you have to upgrade. That being said, if you make one little change, things are going to suddenly go awry, and you're going to wonder,
like with that projector,
what would have had. Yeah.
With that projector, it's never doing 120 frames per second, so there's really no reason why you need an ultra high speed HDMI cable. But that said,
if you're gonna pull a cable,
why not pull the most future-proof cable that you can? Now, he did mention this is inside a wall, and getting 25 feet or more of an ultra high speed cable that is also in-wall rated is not the easiest thing in the world, because as soon as we get past about 16 feet, there's a couple of like 20-foot long copper ultra high speed HDMI cables, but usually once we get past 16 feet, we're into the fiber optic ones. Now, Rui Pro, as a brand, they do have a CL2 rated 33-foot long fiber optic. They have other lengths too, but like he needs 25 feet, so 33 feet is the one that's close to 25 and long enough. That goes for $105 over on Amazon. That is CL2 rated, like I say. But they don't actually have the full certification, the ultra high speed certification. They don't have the hologram and the QR code. Doesn't mean it wouldn't work, but it doesn't have the full certification. There's another brand on Amazon called Silkland that is fully ultra high speed certified. The 33-foot length, its fiber optic, is $90. Now, it has a CMX in-wall rating, which means technically that's supposed to be inside of a conduit. Now, we would say if you're pulling HDMI cable inside of a wall, we want it inside of a conduit anyway. But if you don't already have a conduit in your wall, that might be a bit more work than you want to do. So those are options there. If you're going to do it, we'd go for the ultra high speed anyway, because then you're as future-proof as you can be.
All right, Will has an Apple TV 4K connected to his projector. He set the Apple TV 4K to output 4K 60 SDR with 420 chroma subsampling by default. He then turned on both match dynamic range and match frame rate. As expected, it switched between SDR and HDR depending on the content, and it switches to 24 Hz instead of 60 Hz for the apps and content that support it. But that means a lot of black screens and flashing on his projector whenever one of those changes happens, and his projector isn't the quickest when it comes to handshaking and locking onto the new signal. In particular, YouTube winds up going to a black screen whenever the ads start. Okay. Well, I mean, the upside is that you don't have to look at the ads for a bit and stop, and he winds up missing portions of the actual video he's trying to watch. So what should he change to avoid all those annoying black screens? Well, the way to fix it, is to make your Apple TV just output one resolution all the time.
Yep.
And then you'll never have to deal with it ever again. It'll do the upsampling or the upconversion or whatever itself.
Yeah, if you turn off the match frame rate and the match dynamic range, then you won't have this, because it'll just always be outputting 4K 60. In your case, you'd probably set it to 4K 60 HDR as being the default. And now, of course, that means for sources that are giving you 60 frames per second that was derived from a 24 originally, if your projector doesn't have really good inverse telecine, where it detects that, hey, this is a 60 hertz signal I'm getting, but the content I can tell by looking at the frames was originally 24, and doing that inverse telecine to bring it back to, a smooth looking image, if your projector doesn't do that, then you're going to end up with judder, right? That's why we have that match frame rate on there, so that we can show 24 frames per second content at 24 frames per second and avoid that judder look. I'm not overly concerned about leaving it in HDR mode all the time. The Apple TV 4K does a perfectly good job of putting SDR content into an HDR container. Naturally, that means your projector is going to remain in its HDR mode all the time. So if you're running that in like high lamp mode, that might be the thing where you go, oh, well, manually I need to put it down into low lamp mode if I don't want to be burning it up in high lamp mode all the time. So there's concerns there too. But if the thing that's bugging you most are the black frames coming in between and waiting for that handshake to reestablish, turning off the match frame rate and the match dynamic range and setting the default to basically the highest that you would want for anything. If you're really only using the Apple TV 4K for video content, though, you could absolutely set it to output 4K 24 rather than 4K 60, and then keep it at HDR. Like I say, it does a good job of putting SDR into an HDR container, and it's the frame rate switching that might do the thing. So that's an option. You could output everything at 4K 24 frames per second. Of course, YouTube, most of the content there isn't 24 frames per second.
Right.
So that might look a little bit weird, forcing everything down to 24 if you did that. So there's no solution that's going to be like perfect one size fits all and everything looks as good as it possibly could. But if the black frames in between and the having to redo the handshake bugs you the most, that is sort of the solution there. The other solution would be to actually pay for YouTube Premium so that you don't have ads anymore.
There you go. I guess that's another option. Jason's room is 18 by 12.5 by 6'7" with 2 rows of back seats, back row on the riser, and a 5.2 speaker setup using Paradigm Monitor Series speakers all around, and a pair of Velodyne subs. Middle of the front wall, middle of the back wall. So while he has, a while back, he made 3 DIY absorption panels with images printed on the fabric, and he put those on his back wall and liked the results. Now he's made 7 more panels and put them on his left and right walls. So everywhere that used to have a poster, he now has acoustic panels.
Showing the before images, and now we're going to come to the after images.
Ooh, fancy dancy. Nice.
They are very nice looking.
You did a good job.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what this is an image
It's
of.
the Sopranos on the left, and it is the Enterprise on the right. I really love that image on the right-hand side. Very cool.
It is very cool. It's better than I would have done. So totaling up his room surface area, his DIY panels cover about 9%, but then his room is fully carpeted with a thick underlay, so if he includes that as a surface area coverage, it puts him over 30%. I don't know that would totally include it, but it include part of it for sure.
For the high frequencies, it counts.
Yes, for the high frequencies. So he took measurements before and after with the Room EQ Wizard, and going by the waterfall graphs, it appears its decay times have dropped by about 60 to 100 milliseconds in the frequency range, from about 400 hertz to 7 kilohertz. And by judging by what his ears tell him, dialogue clarity has improved significantly, and he's very pleased with the results. He's had fun making the panels, so he is not opposed to making some more, but he assumes the law of diminishing returns starts to apply at some point, so he'd like our thoughts on the cost to benefit ratio of adding even more panels. In his case, should he call it a day, or would it be worth his while to add more? There's no corner trapping in here. That's about the only thing I would say that I would add from what you have so far. I mean, somebody's going to tell you, oh, put it behind your main speaker. Shut up. Shut up, person that I just made up. You don't need to. But I would think about adding some corner trapping to the left and right of your... Well, I mean, all 4 corners should be open, right? Because of how he's got his subs in the front and back, of the midpoints of the front and back wall, so all 4 corners. So I would pick as many of those corners that you're comfortable with and build some panels for those. And he's got like a wainscoting thing going on on his wall, so you could build a corner trap that sort of complemented the bottom part of that, and then put another corner trap on top of it, just like the GIC tri-traps. Because you seem to be handy, and clearly you can line up fabric in the ways that I don't think is possible outside of a machine doing it. So, you could actually build something here that would look like it fit in that corner.
For sure.
So I would consider doing one or all of those, at least two, but I would do all corners if I could.
Yeah, since, as we've talked about earlier, and with yours, having that full wall-to-wall carpet, your high frequency, most of your vocal range, we're not super concerned about like just general reverberation in this room anymore. You've treated the first reflection points behind your head to begin with, and then now on your side walls. So you've really done the part that matters for the vocal range. The only thing I would focus on now, and like you said, according to the measurements, what was it, 400 to 7,000 hertz roughly?
Yeah.
Like all of that is really taken care of. That means it's the bass now. It's the crossover region. It's the bass. By having bass traps in there, it'll cut down overall reverberation times a little bit more too, because they're fully broadband and go across everything. But you don't need, in my opinion, any more regular panels, right? You don't need to start treating the ceiling and the front wall and all that type of stuff. You've got the dialogue intelligibility where you want it. You've got the general decay times for the vocal range where you need it. That's all good. It's the bass now. If you're going to do any more panels, it's the bass. So it'd be corner bass traps are the most efficient, but you can also look at, edges of the room, right? Maybe along the bottom and top edges of the back of your room or something. If you don't want to do corners, the floor to wall on the back of the room, the ceiling to wall on the back of the room, or along some of the sides or something like that. I
imagine there's space behind that second row where you could just put corner panels, corner traps along the bottom.
Along the back wall there. Yeah.
I mean, that's what I do at the front of my room. So, and if I ever figure out a way to get rid of that stupid couch that's back there, I'm going to do the same thing. It says, due to the existing alcove at the front of the room, he had limited his screen size to 65 inches, but within the next couple of months, he's going to have a new custom cabinetry installed at the front of the room, including a large opening for the TV. I implore you not to do this, but you're going to anyways. So.
It's already in motion.
It's already in motion. So, custom cabinetry is the bane of home theater as far as I'm concerned, but knock yourself out. So we'll be upgrading to an 83-inch OLED. During the installation, the speaker wire that is already installed behind his front wall will be exposed. There's actually 2 pairs of speaker wires already running to the front, left, and right positions. He's only making use of 1 pair right now. He's already using a Denon X4500H, which has 9 amps built in. It can process up to 11 speakers for Dolby Atmos and DTS-X. He hasn't made use of those capabilities yet and doesn't really want to mess with anything on his ceiling. With that spare set of speaker wire already run to the front of the room, would it be very easy to add a pair of front height speakers? It would be very easy to add a pair of front height speakers. Would it be worth doing that? And if so, what speakers would we suggest that would go well with this Paradigm Monitor series speakers? Rob's already got a link in here that I can see, so I know what he's going to suggest, which happens to be the same thing I would suggest, which is the prime elevation speakers, which is what I have at the front of my room. And I will tell you unequivocally, as much as I love those speakers and think they do very, very well, be prepared to be underwhelmed. But not by the speakers. The speakers will be fine. It's just a little bit height at the front of the room. Some people are like, oh my God, that makes all the difference. I have no idea how you can tell that. As somebody who's a professional and been doing this for nearly 20 years, I can tell you it is a marginal, if even noticeable difference. Yesterday, I was watching something, and there was just some like ambient sounds of a party going on, and it was upmixed to Atmos because I think it was Grace and Frankie. And I had kicked the couch way back, and I was leaning back, and I was actually staring at the ceiling at the time for a second. And I was like, "Oh, there's the height speakers. I can notice them now because of the tilt of my head." If that's how you like to watch your 83-inch OLED by not watching it and looking at the ceiling, you may actually find that those height speakers make a big difference. But if you look at your screen, I cannot say you will notice them on the regular or maybe even occasionally.
Yeah, I mean, I can be a pretty critical listener. I'm a bit more gung-ho about Atmos than Tom is in general. I'm not as gung-ho as some people are, but I'd say a little bit more than Tom. However, front height speakers were one of the least impressive things that I've ever added to my home theater. That said, of course, it's just the nicety of, now your Denon is going to light up as Atmos and DTS:X on its front panel. If you just get a kick out of that from seeing those things light up on the front panel of your Denon there, and they haven't until now with your 5.2 speaker setup. So that's the little nicety there. I completely agree with Tom. I don't think you're going to notice the front light speakers at all, maybe. If you do, it's going to be a very subtle, certainly not world-changing thing. It would mostly just be about being able to see Atmos and DTS:X light up on the front panel of your Denon. That's sort of the
as much as I like the prime elevation speakers, which will match very well with your paradigms, by the way.
Well, yes, yeah.
And the ease of installation and everything else. The hardest part is when you take them off the wall because you say, oh, I don't know, paint, is remembering that the keyhole mounts go at an angle. It's just a little weird the first couple of times you do it. But and also, and I'm loath to mention this, after I took them off and finished painting, I went to reinstall them. I installed the first one. I looked up and I went, it's upside down. I put it upside down. It was the angle was at the
aiming up at the ceiling. Hey, you had upward firing.
I had upward firing modules for a second there. But yes, they're easy to install. Everything else, it's just it's the location. It's the location how sensitive our ears are. So, yeah, should you do it? Sure, I think you should do it. I think you got the speaker wire there anyways. So
if the money isn't a big concern to you, then it's a fun little thing, but definitely don't expect some world-changing improvement to what you have.
Right. And I want to say, and I already linked up an article I wrote something about like help. I can't place my speakers optimally because people get really weirded out if it's like they're like 1 degree off of what it's supposed to be. So my height speakers are placed based on stud placement in my room because I wanted to hit a stud with both of these with at least 2 of the screws. There's 4 screws that go into the wall, and I just wanted to hit because I know if I hit a stud with even 1 screw, that's going to be those speakers aren't coming down, right?
For sure.
So I placed them based on that. And if you look at the screen and you look at my speakers and the speakers are on the floor and the speakers that are on the ceiling, they're not the same. They're not
perfectly symmetrical.
That where they should be. And I toyed with the idea of I'm taking everything down to paint. I can just move the speaker over. It would literally be 6 inches, on the ceiling, with less than maybe 2 degrees of difference from the angle from where I'm sitting, and I just couldn't do it.
I mean, the worrying about Atmos speaker placement, worrying that has to be absolutely perfect according to some studio or cinema specification. I'm like, there has never been less critical sounding speakers in our setups than Atmos speakers. It's the last worry on my mind.
Right, I totally agree. So just so you're just put them up there-ish.
Yep. Generally in front and to the left, generally behind and to the right. That's all I really need.
Daniel has a basement renovation in progress. He'd like to run his subwoofer cables inside the walls. Does he need to run actual RCA cables in walls, or can he use F-type coax, like what you would use for cable TV connection? Is one better than the other? I thought that the coax is RCA. It's just that's the same thing, right?
The cable itself it's just the jacks on the end that change. But I mean, this, I don't expect everybody to know that about the internals of the cable. Like if you go out and buy a cable TV cable with the screw-on F-type connector, not everybody's going to necessarily know that the cable itself in an RCA cable with the RCA jacks, the same cable, that is the plugs that change. So no problem with wondering about that. I would say that having that F-type connector probably is a good idea inside the wall. It's not just a friction fit like RCA is. It actually screws on. So they absolutely, if you're using just like Keystone Jack wall plates, they have ones where it's an F-type screw-on connector on the inside and a regular RCA jack on the outside. I'm assuming you'll still use an RCA cable on the outside of the wall to actually connect to your subwoofer rather than getting, say, an RCA to F-type adapter cable, right? Probably just going to be RCA to RCA for the cable on the outside of the wall. So why not get the Keystone jack that has the RCA jack on the outside and the screw-on F-type connector on the inside. The cable itself is coax in both cases, so no problem just swapping out the type of jack, the type of connector that's on the end. And yeah, I think that screw-on connection makes a lot of sense inside the wall. It's more physically secure.
Yeah, and the cable itself, especially the coax that they use for that the installers use when they come out for your cable or internet, it's a lot firmer, and it's just a little bit. It's not what you would want out of an RCA cable that is inside your home theater, but it's certainly something that's a lot easier to work with when it's in your wall.
Right.
So
Stays put.
I think that it's a very good option here. Ron would like to recommend a recommendation for a new computer monitor. Didn't we talk about the OLED the other day, the 42?
We did, but there's a reason why it won't be OLED in this instance, at least in his mind right now.
So he uses a MacBook Pro, so he'd like a monitor that will work well with that for his purposes, but then he'd also like to use that same monitor with his PS5. At the moment, he uses a 1080p 40-inch TCL TV for gaming. That size is too large for his computer purposes, so he does not want the 42-inch OLED that I was just talking about. Plus, he doesn't want to pay that much, which is $1,250 to $1,400.
That's actually, to me, the bigger reason, because I'm like, that 42-inch OLED, you just put it a little bit pricey. Farther away. But the price, that's fair enough.
We got some curved ones now that you press a button and they'll curve around you. Then you don't have to worry about it.
They're also 42 inches, though.
So you want something around 32 inches. What do we recommend? I don't know, Rob. What do we recommend?
Yeah, so I mean, a little bit lower in price, but in terms of getting basically as good performance as you can, that does all the things your PS5 can do. So 4K 120 with variable refresh rate, HDR, and actually making HDR look like HDR. Samsung's Odyssey Neo G7 is a 32-inch monitor that has HDMI 2.1 inputs. It actually runs at 144 hertz, but will have variable refresh rate and has no problem running at 120 hertz. It actually genuinely delivers 1000 nit peaks. This is mini LED backlighting with quantum dot color behind a VA LCD type panel. So HDR actually looks like HDR is what I'm getting across on this thing. It has almost 1200 zones of local dimming. So it's pretty darn good. Will there still be a tiny little bit of blooming compared to an OLED? Sure, but this is kind of about as good as LCD displays get for HDR video purposes and gaming like that. It is curved. It's got a curve on it. Can't really get away with that from that with Samsung's monitors. So whether you want the curve or not is going to be part of it. But also it's the price. It's $1,100. So it is cheaper than the 42-inch OLEDs, but only by about $150. So I'm not sure if that's exactly what you want. But just in terms of image quality for your PS5 games, can't really get better than that. Does all the features, 4K 120, VRR, all that type of stuff. In terms of connecting it to your MacBook, it would be running at 120 hertz when it connects to Mac OS. It won't run at the 144, but I think you'll be okay at 120 hertz with your Mac. So that is an option if you got to bring the price down, which I would absolutely understand. Gigabyte probably has a couple of your best options in the 32-inch size. They have their M32U. These model numbers are going to be super confusing, but there's an M32U, goes for $680. That is completely flat. It supports all the things, right? Like it has HDMI 2.1, but it's HDMI 2.1 ports that are limited to 24 gigabits per second. So if you're outputting 4K 120 HDR from your PS5 to this monitor, it will need to be at that 420 chroma subsampling. It's not going to be able to take a full 444 signal, but that's okay. The PS5 can totally do that. There's no real worries about that, and you can still do 4K 120 with VRR. $680. This uses an IPS panel, so the native panel contrast is not that great, and it's edge lit. So it's display HDR 400 rated, which again means it can accept an HDR signal. It can't really show it to you. With that IPS panel and the low contrast, HDR doesn't really look like HDR. But 32-inch size, $680, more affordable, gives you the 4K 120 and VRR support. Now, there is another one from Gigabyte with, you got to love this model number, M32UC. They just added a C to the end of it, which I guess stands for curved, because This one is a curved version, but it uses a VA LCD type panel, so the native panel contrast is significantly higher than the flat IPS version, and the price comes down to $580. So it actually shows HDR. Again, this is display HDR 400 rated, but HDR looks a little bit more HDR on the M32UC simply because it's the VA LCD type panel with the higher native panel contrast. But it's curved. So if you want the VA panels that actually make HDR kind of look like HDR, I mean, particularly in the Samsung's case, it really does. They're curved, unfortunately. So there is that $680 M32U that is flat, but it's an IPS panel. So HDR doesn't really look like HDR. But those are the ones I would point you to.
All right. Sounds like you're getting a curved monitor. Raf just got a Panasonic UB9000 Ultra HD Blu-ray player. It has 2 HDMI outputs, one for audio only. Would there be any benefit to running 2 HDMI cables? Any improvement to audio video quality?
How old is your AV receiver?
Well, I guess there you go. I guess that would be the one benefit. If your AV receiver cannot pass through everything, then yes. You would run the video to their display and the audio to your receiver. But that's the reason why that exists. That exists for people who have upgraded their player and their TV, but not their receiver.
Yep. So this is going back to when you had an HDMI 1.4 receiver. Because if you have HDMI 2.0 or HDMI 2.1 on your AV receiver, then you don't need the two separate HDMI cables from your Panasonic Ultra HD Blu-ray player. There's nothing coming out of that Ultra HD Blu-ray player that needs HDMI 2.1. You do not need ultra high speed. You're topping out at 4K 60 for sure with an Ultra HD Blu-ray player, so that is HDMI 2.0. That is premium high speed that you might need there. So as long as your AV receiver can pass through 18 gigabits per second, has HDMI 2.0, can pass through Dolby Vision, can pass through HDR10, 4K 60, then the single HDMI cable is all you need. That'll plug into your HDMI 2.0 AV receiver and get passed on from there to your television. There's absolutely no increase in video or audio quality by separating out from the player. That was strictly there for the people when Ultra HD Blu-ray came out. A lot of us still had HDMI 1.4 receivers that couldn't pass through Dolby Vision, couldn't pass through HDR10. So that is why they had the separate audio-only connection for those folks.
All right. Infinite Gary's Luxman integrated amp has a stereo amplifier built in, but it has 2 pairs of binding posts so that you can connect speakers A and B. A physical switch on the front panel lets you output to speakers A, B, or both at the same time. If Gary would like to try an A-B comparison between the 2 different pairs of speaker cables, he could connect both pairs of outputs from his Luxman to the same pair of speakers, or would that mess up? What? Same pair of speakers, or would that mess something up? If you would like to try an A-B comparison between 2 different pairs of speaker cables.
Yeah, so he's trying to see if he can hear a difference between different speaker cables.
As long as the A-B are physically, not maybe physically, but there is absolutely no output coming out of the other one when you're on one.
Mm-hmm.
It should.
Well, I mean, even if there were, right? Like this, if you think about this, like imagine that you just had regular pair of binding posts from any amplifier or AV receiver, regular pair of speakers, and for some reason you ran 2 speaker wires, right? Like you connected 2 pairs of speaker wires to the binding post on the left and ran those 2 pairs of speaker wires to the single pair of binding posts on your speaker. Like it wouldn't really harm anything. That's okay. And in effect, that's what's going on because it's the same amplifiers inside this Luxman. It's just that you have the option of running speaker A or speaker B or speaker A and B together. So this isn't a case where you're wiring one speaker to two different amplifiers. Yeah. That you wouldn't want to do. You wouldn't want to have 2 pairs of speaker wire plugged into one speaker and then going to 2 separate amplifiers and trying to A/B compare the 2 amplifiers that way. In that scenario, you definitely need an external speaker switch. But for this, since ultimately the speaker wires are ending up at the same amplifier anyway, and even if you accidentally put it into speaker A plus B mode, I mean, it's just got 2 pairs of wires going to one speaker. Like there's nothing there's nothing that can really go wrong here, as far as I can tell. So I think in this strange scenario that it would be okay. That's my thinking through it. I mean, I guess the super safe answer is always use a speaker selector switch if you're doing anything. But in this instance, I think you're all right. I don't see any reason this would blow anything up or something like that. The connections are all coming back to the same amplifier and the same pair of speakers, no matter what.
Yeah, I just don't know anything about that Luxman. I guess it is my concern.
Yeah, like if when you're turning off, you got speaker A on but speaker B off, is it like just a resistor inside there that's doing that? Or, yeah,
I don't know. It does feel... It feels risky, like without knowing, you know what I mean? And I don't
like we're so used to saying don't put two pairs of speaker wires to the same speaker from two separate amplifiers like that.
Right.
Unless it's like a full bi-amp situation where you've got two pairs of binding posts on the speaker and they have the jumpers removed between them, then obviously you're going to have two separate amplifiers. But like when it's one pair of binding posts on the speakers, we're generally like, yeah, don't run two pairs of speaker wires to that. But like I say, in this case, what's going to happen? They're both speaker wires are going back to the same amplifier.
Yeah.
Little weird, but I don't
it still feels wrong to say you can do it.
I know.
So I'll tell you what. Rob says it'll be fine. I think something's going to break. One of us is going to be right. And hopefully it's not me. All right, Rob, that's it for this week. So
that's fine. Yes.
Let's remind people.
I've got here. I hope it was not too terrible to listen to. I don't know how this is going to turn out sound-wise. But the cats didn't even come in. I'm kind of disappointed. There was no cuddles.
It's fine. All right, so remind people, if you want to get your question answered on this podcast, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. We want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Alan and Raph for going to avrant.com, clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and sending us a PayPal donation, as well as our 138 patrons over at patreon.com, including Rob M.
That is for sure. Alan and Raph, thank you both very much for those PayPal donations. And patreon.com/AVRant podcast is where to go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So a big thank you to our 138 patrons over there. Rob M., thank you for being one of them.
Let's see here. We've got, I want to thank Aras for sending a donation to Rob to help him with his apartment restoration. Eddie for sending Rob a Canadian movie code. And Jason for sending me permission to use photos on avgadgets.com.
Aras, thank you very much for that direct PayPal donation to me. That's super appreciated. Very, very generous and nice of you. Eddie, thanks very much for that movie code. Sorry I forgot to mention you last week. At least I think I did. I don't know. My brain's all fried right now. And Jason, thanks very much for giving Tom permission to use your excellent photos of your DIY acoustic panels. I'm certain Tom will find a way to use those on avgadgets.com.
Sure, I will. We also want to thank those who thanked us for keeping the podcast going, including Dazz, Rob M., Aras, Gurinder, Jason, and Alan.
For sure, Dazz, Rob, Aras, Gurinder, Jason, and Alan, thank you all so much for those notes of gratitude to us for keeping the podcast going in whatever form it might take for, the foreseeable future at this point. I have no idea how long this is going to keep going. It's getting a bit depressing. But yes, that'll be fine. We'll be here in some form or fashion. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen, stick with us through this all, and keep sending in your questions.
For AVRant, I'm Tom Antry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.